Well, to discuss more, we're joined now by John Sitilides, a former U.S. State Department diplomacy consultant, a senior fellow for global risks at the Center for the National Interest, as well as a geopolitical strategist at Trilogy Advisors. John, great to have you with us on I-24 News today. After so many threats, pauses, broken understandings, we hear the latest backlash coming from the U.S. president. Does either side then, Washington or Tehran, have enough credibility at this moment to go back to the negotiating table and make a deal?
Well, we need to first take a look at the history of Iranian negotiations. I mean, they have been duplicitous since 1979, and it's a little bit strange trying to understand the administration's perspective right now and policies, given the fact that really nothing different is taking place on the Iranian side than what they have done with previous administrations over previous issues, including so-called denuclearization. And right now, they've called President Trump a liar. They deny that there are any direct talks with the U.S., despite what the president said yesterday. They're in direct talks only with Oman regarding how to provide tolls or some type of fees on shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. And they've executed two political prisoners, again, to demonstrate ironclad control over everything political and governmental in Tehran. So I don't know really where we're going right now with any so-called negotiations. As long as the IRGC and the clerical elites feel that they are impervious to the kinds of military strikes and the half-hearted economic pressure to date on those elites, on the IRGC commanders, that's my concern about right now, where we might be going and where, unfortunately, we're not going, especially on so-called denuclearization.
Well, this comes back to the issue of credibility. Iran claims they can't trust the Americans. For example, under the June Memorandum of Understanding, oil sanctions, they were briefly eased and they were reimposed weeks later. So when it comes to new discussions for a deal, why would Iran trust that sanctions relief offered in a fresh deal would actually last? Is this still a card that the U.S. can use to try and lure the Iranians back to the table?
Well, the Iranians do hold significant leverage both in effectively closing down the Strait of Hormuz, although if we're accurate about history, it began with the decisions by Lloyd's of London to raise the price of war risk insurance and the ship owners who refused to put ships into the Gulf, given the danger to the ships and to the crews. But the Iranians recognize they have more leverage here on effectively closing down the Strait of Hormuz than they do with the nuclear option. And of course, they're holding the infrastructure, the energy infrastructure of the Gulf Cooperation Council countries hostage. It seems that's the impetus for the Saudi leader's phone call to President Trump on Saturday, fearing that oil fields, gas fields, and refineries throughout the Persian Gulf would be struck by Iran in the event there was a so-called massive military attack by the U.S. against Iranian targets.
So what do you make of these separate negotiations that Iran says is currently happening with Oman when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz? Opening the Strait of Hormuz, at least somewhat, even though it would be more towards the Iranian side, and they would still have control over it. But could that actually produce a limited shipping deal, even if it doesn't resolve the wider conflict?
I don't think it's in the interest of any of the countries outside of Iran, and frankly, for the global economy and for international shipping and the global economy and the underpinnings of free and open shipping that provide for the prosperity that we enjoy around the world today in the global economy, for there to be any type of control by any country, whether it's Iran, Oman, or anyone else, over free and open shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. One, it would be extraordinarily deleterious to the export of oil, LNG, petrochemicals, fertilizers, and other critical products like helium out of the Persian Gulf, which is so important for countries in South Asia, Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and frankly, East Asia and Europe. But also, it would set a very dangerous precedent for strategic choke points in free and open waterways in other parts of the world. The Strait of Malacca between Singapore and Indonesia. Imagine China looks at what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz and decides to impose tolls on the South China Sea or through the Taiwan Strait, or Russia and the Baltic Sea. So no, it is absolutely imperative that the United States, in order to succeed, must have an outcome where the Strait of Hormuz provides for free and open shipping for all countries. And the maximum leverage that we have against Iran is the ability to choke off any imports and exports from Iranian ports, no more sales of any Iranian oil to anywhere in the world, and really to continue to degrade the commercial empire controlled by the IRGC commanders and the clerical elite, energy, telecommunications, construction, shipping, to destroy them financially, the individuals, their assets, their entities. I think that will have a far more impactful outcome here than continued strikes that are simply wounding parts of the Iranian economy, but not actually doing any major damage to the leadership.
Well, President Trump does say that the blockade is still in effect and will remain in effect even if diplomacy does continue. But how long do you see Trump likely giving diplomacy a chance before putting military options back on the table, whether that be military options in the Strait of Hormuz or military options on energy infrastructure inside Iran?
Well, one of the problems that we see is, of course, President Trump has a major domestic deadline of the upcoming November congressional elections. And the fear inside the White House is, of course, if the Democratic Party wins control of the House of Representatives, the next 2 years will see nothing but impeachment and investigations, not only of President Trump, but his family, his private business, and pretty much a good part of the Republican leadership in the House and the Senate. So that's the important deadline for the president. Otherwise, I think this could carry on for quite some time. And so the president has to balance out both domestic political priorities with the need to get free and open shipping moving as quickly as possible, and then somehow to provide for, frankly, a different type of regime in Iran that can honestly and genuinely negotiate a denuclearization pact. That's not going to take place as long as this IRGC and the clerical elite remain in power.
John Sitilides, great to have you with us on I-24 News today. Thanks for sharing this insight.
Thanks for having me.